Welcome to episode 70 of the Liz McMullen Show. I am welcoming Smitty to my stage. The pen name is Susan Smith, if you're going to look through the books that we're discussing. So I'm very excited to have you on, Smitty.
Well, I'm very delighted to be here.
So I've been a huge fan of your books, and I got into your books when I was in a reading binge several years ago. And then I ran out of money to do that because it gets expensive. And so what I end up doing is the books that I really enjoy, I tend to read over and over again. And then I end up like memorizing aspects of the books, which is totally unfair for the people I have on. I had Catherine Friend on, and she actually ended up reading her older books so that, we could discuss it. Because for me, it's fresh in my mind. For you, you wrote it many, many years ago.
A few, yeah.
We're not talking like a decade or so, or I'm not sure. I'm getting lost in the march of time, Smitty.
The first one I wrote more than 15 years ago.
Okay, so that was of drag queens and of drag kings and the Wheel of Fate.
Yeah, I wrote that when I was still in grad school.
When I was reading it, I was like, Taryn had an amazing education at the hands of Rhea, and I was like, made me want to be smarter and more well-read when I was going through it. I was like, oh goodness. So how did you come up with this
one of the things...
Go ahead. Hello?
I'm sorry, I lost you there for a minute.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Okay, good.
So how did you come up with...
Could you repeat the question?
Sure. How did you come up with Of Drag Kings and the Wheel of Fate?
Well, a lot of it was based on my early experiences in the drag community and the theater community here in Buffalo. And then, of course, Flights of Fancy. But I'm getting an internet connection problem.
I hear you perfectly fine.
Okay, good. Based on my early experience in the drag community, especially the drag king community in Buffalo, and the theater community, and I extrapolated from there the way any writer will. I pulled composite characters together and ran with it.
Yeah, the evolution of the drag community. Like when I was a baby dyke, I used to go to this place in New York City called Esquilita, and
yep.
Sometimes it's called, like there are dubious descriptors. Like some people call it, place where trans folks would go, or a drag queen place. But for me, it was just a Latin club with a lot of awesome people and a nightly drag show. But there always was like there's a dearth of drag king performers, but that's been changing over the years.
Well, I think it, as an art form, really started out with performers like Stormy Weber. I mean, going back to the late 50s. And in the early 90s, there was drag king workshops being done in New York City. I believe it's Diane Torr's Drag King for a Day. And a few of the members of the Buffalo theater community took the workshop in New York and brought what they learned back to Buffalo. And we threw the first drag show. And we were actually... raising money for the March on Washington to get a bus of people together and send them down. I think this was back in 1993. Mm-hmm. So it goes back a while, even locally.
I met Stormy.
Yeah?
She's just an incredible person, and she often would be in Henrietta Hudson.
Yep.
And she's just so approachable and kind and magnanimous. That's one of the things that I've always enjoyed about the queer community is how kind we can be to each other. It's much more appealing than the straight bars where there seemed to be like mortal combat between like women trying to get the attention of men.
Well, I think we have to rely on each other so much more in a lot fewer venues. that we have to create everything that could come from other places for straight people. They have a chance to have community at church and at school and other things, but our community started out in the bars. That's the one place where we could go and recognize one another. So that would have to become surrogate family and support group and lovers and ex-lovers and potlucks and the whole thing.
And quiche, lots and lots of quiche.
Lots of quiche, yes.
Oh, God, I think there was a show when Logo first started called Rick and Steve.
Mm.
And they were kind of Lego characters. And the lesbians, whenever they would come over for, a potluck or just bring something with them for a meal, they always brought quiche. And there's so many funny things in there. Like there were I think they had, the two guys had picked up, they wanted to try a threesome, and they had picked up somebody who was a famous porn star, and it turned out kind of like Angel, who's transitioned from female to male, and so they were having sex, and they didn't realize what the story was, and one of them must have taken a hand onto the cock and it detached, and like he starts screaming, and it's like, don't worry, it's a snap-on.
It goes right back on. Sometimes that conversation should happen before all of the clothing comes off, just for ease of fluidity.
Yes. So that they're already kind
but
of
really,
like...
who hasn't been there? Who hasn't been there? You lube up your hands before you put your cock in the harness, and then you drop it and you're chasing it across the floor. Nobody else.
Oh, I have so many inappropriate comments that go along with that. Oh my goodness.
You learn as you go.
I know. Like, I can't, well, fuck it. I want to say it anyway, because that's what occurred to me, is that, like, when you're using well, I don't know, that probably happens with real one. Well, I don't even know. But I don't even know.
Speculate wildly.
It's like, I can't even. So, like, for anal sex, it's best when you're trying to actually get in, not to have a lot of lube, and then you can actually add lube afterwards for the actual activity itself. Otherwise, you like have something really slippery, and you're trying to put it into something very tight, and it's just, it can be comic.
You don't have the control you should have.
The little things that you learn, and interestingly enough, this segues into...
And this is why we're so important to one another. We pass our culture along.
Yeah, which kind of segues, interestingly enough, into this book that you wrote called Put Away Wet.
Yes.
And so if you could give my listening public a little idea about the book, and then I can make my inappropriate comments.
Okay, well, I had actually been kicking around the idea and talking to the publisher about it, of writing something that was more erotica.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, that's still filtered through my brain, so it ended up being a sort of melancholy look at identity while I was trying to write sex, and there was always a little bit of both in there. But it started out as at least partially a joke, to see how far I could push things. I mean, for God's sake, the first line of the book is, "I know that ass," and my friends tease me about that endlessly to this day. If they come to a reading I'm doing, they make sure to ask about it.
That ass.
Yeah.
So
I wanted to see what I could get away with, and apparently I got away with it.
Oh my goodness. And it was interesting. Well, Joey had a psycho ex-girlfriend, Psycho
Yes.
Barbie.
Psycho Barbie, which is a nickname.
It's very appropriate, Some people are characters in and of themselves.
Yes.
And so she was just, well, Joey was somewhat of a doormat.
Yeah, very much.
And
a lot of us are when we're younger, so I thought it would be showing progression.
Well, I mean, like, there were the foibles, but there were also really interesting things. She had, through her friend's help, created this online ad, which was pretty much I don't even know if it's looking for a fuck buddy, but just looking for somebody to be with, and, with no drama and just looking for experience and whatnot. And what
Yes.
I thought was really interesting was the relationship that she formed with the older woman who was teaching her the hows and whys of BDSM, uh,
Yes. Yeah.
which
Her,
was a
her primary
journey.
relationship.
Yeah, sorry, I interrupted you. It was a
No, that's
major.
okay.
It was like a major journey for Joey. There was a lot to learn. There was a lot being taught, and it's very intense. I've always found I find BDSM scenes very enlightening. Because there's the power dynamic, and there's the issues of boundaries and consent and what your body can do and what your mind can do in the context of an interaction. So I've always find that appealing.
Absolutely. And the communication level has to be extremely high. It's really a play of brain with brain before it's a play of skin with skin.
Mm-hmm.
And the beauty of that relationship was that Joey was learning from Naomi constantly, in bed, out of bed, how to be an adult, how to get along with people, how to get along with yourself. And it's really a mentoring relationship that I think both of them got something out of, but particularly Joey. She really grew up.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the nearly tantric sex.
Yes.
I don't remember
Yes.
the first sexual interaction because I did not reread this one, but it obviously made an impression on me. Was where her climax kept on being pushed off and pushed off to the point where, like, it's painful and stressful. But she's like, I don't want it to stop, but I'd like to get off, please.
Well, that can be a stretching and growing experience.
Oh my God, yes it can.
And I wanted to include, when I was writing that, things that felt authentic and more than one kind of scene-based sex. There's some lighthearted stuff. There's some really playful stuff. There's some really silly stuff. And there's some fairly intense stuff. I mean, I wanted to see if I could give a portrait of what a progression would be like.
Plus, there were different role plays, and sometimes taking on a role can give you a lot more confidence in
Yes.
what you're doing, and also the exploration of the effect that you can have on another individual, and
Yes.
and the process of gaining that experience that Joey was so lacking.
Yeah, it was absolutely fundamental. She had to learn to be other people before she could learn to be herself. And that is where she got her sense of power from. And from that, she could go back to inhabiting her own skin and then be powerful in it.
Absolutely, but she had kind of created. I don't know if paradigm is the right word, but she had created basically the way that she was going to interact with people erotically, which was with no strings attached and pretty much just sexual experience. And then you get to the point where she's grown a lot. She's definitely learned a lot of things, and then she has to kind of learn how to be a lover and in a relationship.
Yep.
Which has got to be really terrifying on the part of her partner. She's like, this person has designed themselves to be somewhat of a player, and even though, without the cockiness, I suppose. And but the risk of falling in love with somebody who has decided to live their sexual life that way.
Well, I don't think you always have to be cocky to be a player.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's also possible to have a lot of waif-like approach, especially someone without a lot of experience. They can still be blundering through how to create themselves. I think that's what was really going on for Joey. And yeah, it's got to be terrifying for someone who is much more grounded and ready for an emotional connection to wait for someone to come to terms with themselves so they can come to terms with you.
Mm-hmm. Of course, they thought unkindly to grow the fuck up and be ready to be an adult. And then Barbie shows up again, of course.
Right.
Well,
Oh yeah, like any good vampire film, the vampire's going to come right back out of the grave, even if you staked it. You got to throw some more holy water and cut their head off and salt the earth just to be sure.
Cross all your eyes and your
Yes.
stakes and beheadings and whatnot. And I guess it's a good barometer of growth to see what would happen when that poisonous person shows up again. So, speaking of poisonous people, I'm just kidding. Um, you know, in of Drag Kings and the Wheel of Fate, one of the references that was made, like I don't want to ruin how it came about, but the book by Leslie Feinberg, Stone Butch Blues, is
Yes.
I feel like because I read it when I was a baby dyke, and I actually saw him. He made an appearance in Amherst,
Yep.
Massachusetts, and it was such a catalyst to growth and interest for me. And I had no idea. I mean, you always know something, bad things happen, and they used to take pictures of people when they were coming out of gay establishments and try to get them fired from their jobs and all the other stuff. But I never really got the feel for what life would be like for a butch, and then when he re-established it as about a drag king.
Yep.
And it was horrifying, enlightening. It changed my entire worldview, all that in one book. And you tied that into how important that was for Taryn, and it definitely made an impact on me.
Uh, One of the things that keeps popping up again and again in the things that I write, whether I deliberately put it there or not, is the importance of having a connection to a timeline of history in your own community. That you only find out who you are by knowing who your people have been,
Mm-hmm.
if I can put it that way. Direct mentorship is something that we have a lot of in the queer community, but books hold that place for so many people because they don't have access to other people who can mentor them.
Mm-hmm.
They might be the only queer person they ever know when they're very young. And thankfully, that's changing with visibility and time and media and the internet. But books for a long time were that link and gave us a sense of who we were. I was fortunate enough to be in Buffalo when Leslie Feinberg first put Drag King out and came and did the first reading and signed books and met with everybody. And it was absolutely life-changing for me, the same way it was for you. But in a sense that suddenly I had the ability to see someone who had been where I might be,
Mm-hmm.
and an idea of how I might be able to work out everything in front of me and not only survive, but make a life at it. And when you don't have any role models, that can be life changing.
Mm-hmm.
It shakes you to your core. You don't get over it. And I am of the firm opinion that everybody should have as many role models as possible so we can really get an idea of how many ways there are to be. And there's no single way to be anything, certainly not queer. And the more role models, the better. But if there's anything that we lack, it's an access to our own history.
You know, for me, when I was reading it, I never imagined what life would be like for somebody trying to find themselves in a time where, they had to sneak into the bars to kind of see people like themselves.
Yep.
And one of the things that I felt was so instructive in Stone Butch Blues was getting the internal dialogue, the thoughts that went through the life of somebody with stone. And in real life, folks who are stone, femme, or butch are very private. So
Yes.
getting that look inside, their thoughts, their experiences, the awful things that happen when they've been arrested, and trying to find a place for yourself in the community, which is very different. Like there was like a home for you if you were a lesbian or if you were a gay man. But if you were trans, there was almost no place for you to be outside of, there was room, I guess, for drag queens, but there wasn't room for male to female or female to male. And I that book changed me so much because it gave me a window into the lives of people that, I may never have gotten that level of enlightenment from.
Absolutely. And if literature is worth anything, it's to let us get under the skin of people who are just slightly different from us, and be able to feel what they feel and think what they think, and expand our human empathy. If anything makes us human, it should be empathy.
And like other things, like trying to find work,
Yep.
when, like, let's say if a lot of times it was the femmes who were supporting the butches because the butches had a very hard time finding work,
Right.
especially in, male-dominated jobs. And the promised land was, getting a job with a union and, really getting some pay. And that was very difficult. And one of the other things that came up was some of the femmes were sex workers.
Yep.
And the difficulties of their lives, and then finding that fragile, tender connection with somebody else and finding a home with each other. It was a hard book to read, but it also shows like the little ray of sunlight in difficult lives.
Right. No matter how much the dominant culture will try to crush things it does not approve of, people will still exist and live and find ways to connect with each other. And you can marginalize us to the very edges of society, and we will still weave around that a border and a land for ourselves. And then from there, keep pushing back in toward the center. You cannot eradicate what you're afraid of, especially culturally.
I guess one of the final frontiers at this point, is still battling with, employment. There are folks who start to transition in their workplace and may lose their job.
Yes, and there are no legal protections. I think the fact that we still have to be talking about this in 2014 is insane. The basic human rights of housing and protection, I think ENDA should push through tomorrow. People should be able to be guaranteed a chance to have health care and a place to live and a job.
Mm-hmm.
And transitioning is such a weighted process already. Additional stress does not need to be put on that.
And there are extra difficulties for those who transition or don't, but who don't easily pass.
Yeah. Passing privilege is, unfortunately, the dominant culture likes to reward certain kinds of behavior. And if you fit into one of the acceptable categories, meaning if you pass and they can't tell, then you get some of that approval. Not all of it. And it can be revoked very quickly and very violently. But you get some of that approval. The people who can't pass have it much harder constantly.
Absolutely. There's this, I'm a documentary freak. I like to watch the History Channel and all these other things. And there was one woman who had all this experience, doing, I guess, I don't remember if it was welding or it was just, another male-dominated job. And she couldn't get a job even though she had tons of experience, and they were hiring people who had absolutely no experience. And a lot of times people are unable to find work. They become homeless. They don't have like a place to be, all because they don't fit into this gender norm or what's appropriate behavior. And it really is heart-wrenching. And a lot of times the younger ones end up on the street and their only options is sex work. And that's just untenable in a society that we'd like to think of ourselves as civilized.
Right. You have to look at the cost of societal disapproval. It's not like people are going to stop existing. They're just going to exist in ways that are so much more difficult.
Mm-hmm.
I wish people would understand that. You cannot eradicate groups of people simply because you disapprove them.
But things are changing. Not like these issues still exist. But I remember when I was coming up, it was in the late '90s, the early millennium, I guess what it's called, and there was I was having a hard time finding a place for myself when it came to identification.
Sure.
Um, because, there was butch and there was femme and there was androgynous. And sometimes in colleges and in other environments, androgyny is the only way to be appropriate. Passing is terrible. Femmes are invisible. And for me, even though I genetically, present as a feminine person, that's not how I identify. And, I used to love, dress up. I love going to Esquilita and all these other places. And my philosophy was, if drag queens can wear a dress and really high heels in daylight, then I can too.
Yeah. If you see an example of that much courage, it just gives you hope to try it yourself. Absolutely.
I just it was one Pride, I think it was 98, and I was wearing this little silver mini dress and these huge platforms and glitter and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, this is a place for me to be. And then other nights, like I would dress, very masculine. And, I got confronted very often, like the butches finding me dressing as a femme one night makes me not possibly a butch and inappropriate behavior, and then other butches when I'm dressed femme were telling me I wasn't acting feminine enough. And now there are all sorts of ways to identify. I think they put like 50 different choices on Facebook as to how you could identify. And I was like, that would have been so much nicer.
Wouldn't it? I'm so glad to see it. I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm 4,000 years old, but I came of age in the 80s. And the only thing that we had were, a passed around copy of Ruby Fruit Jungle. We didn't even have the internet yet. So to see people have access to not only category and information and background, but each other. You can go on YouTube and look at videos of people who are transitioning and recording their experiences and talking to you about it all throughout, and it's fantastic.
I love the wealth of information out there, and I love the reaching out. I mean, at the same time, we have issues with cyberbullying and whatnot, but there's also that ability to find community, and the whole It Gets Better project was life-saving for many people, and I love that those things are out there.
One thing being a persecuted minority will teach you is how to organize and how to fight back, and we've always been good at that. From the AIDS crisis right on through.
Yeah, I think it's amazing and fun and enlightening, and I was talking to Therese Usmansky, and like in her books, like a lot of the things that happened sexually was fascinating to me, and eventually ended up things that I wanted to try. But for her, there weren't a lot of choices, and you put out these books, and there's a lot of friction if you have certain types of sex in books. And she's like, it's amazing now people can have shows talking about these things that were unspoken or unapproved of.
Sure, absolutely.
So one of the other things, like I want to segue into another topic that was in Of Drag Kings, is spirituality.
Sure.
And, you created this amazing mythology between Taryn and Rosalind and Rhea and all the other different folks that, we keep on getting incarnated as and living with. And I thought it was absolutely fascinating. How did you get into that aspect?
I've been, I think exploring would be the word. Exploring varieties of spirituality since I was in third grade. And this is going to sound hysterical. I read Lord of the Rings. Mm-hmm. I read The Silmarillion. I read The Hobbit. And the talk of the elves worshiping different gods, their own gods, nature gods, Elbereth. The fact that there were names for other gods in third grade was fascinating for me, so I had to go look up outside of fantasy where other gods might be, where other mythologies, because if there were other people who had had these experiences, then probably there were lots of things that I didn't know and I could learn. And then, of course, I fell into Dungeons and Dragons and never came out. But I'm again, one of the things that I don't always deliberately put in my books, but seems to splash over everywhere, is a variety of pagan spirituality and mythology and personal experience of the divine. I try to stay away from giving a single solid answer about what I believe, because that's extraordinarily variable, mutable, even private. But I have a passion for all of the ways that we experience religion. And it's a great, great study of mine.
One of the things that I really dug in there, and I think it's called sympathetic magic, where
yes, yeah.
What was that game? Better You Than Me? I can't.
Better You Than Me. Yes, that's actually something that we played here in Buffalo after breakups in the early days.
Can you explain to my listeners what the game is like?
Sure. Assuming that a friend has gone through a breakup, and all breakups are heartbreaking on one level or another, you usually gather together with your friends, and we would sit on a porch and do it because, beautiful shot of the street in the summer and all of that. Some reason people seem to break up a lot in the summer. Sometimes it would be the fall. And you would sit around with your friends, and everyone had to tell the worst, most painful or embarrassing story they could to try and make the person who was experiencing the loss feel better. And it could be comic and it could be genuinely tragic, but the end of the story, everyone else had to say to you or chant to you, better you than me. And it was gallows humor, but it gave a chance to feel pain as a community and to start laughing about it. And when you start laughing, you start healing.
I loved it. I loved the stories that came up. They were heartbreaking, heart-wrenching, and difficult, and sometimes funny. Or, like you said, the gallows humor where it really was not fucking funny. But in retrospect, you can find the humor in it. And I like that a lot. I like the household that you created. It was chosen family, but there was also that magic element with psychic and, different connections, past lives, and all that kind of stuff. And it was so grounded and sincere. And a lot of times when people talk about paganism, they don't have a lot of respect for it. And, I felt it was so grounded in history. That's why I like watching. I think it's kind of funny. Ancient Aliens is so fucking funny. And
okay, as long as you think it's funny, but
it's hilarious. And
of course it's hilarious. My God. All right, I have to say this for the record. The Egyptians built the pyramids. It was not the Greys. It was not anyone from Beetlejuice. It was the genuine people who lived in the time period and had the technology.
Okay. But the thing that I find fascinating about this show, and I can't help it, because I tend to have TV on in the background when I'm online. And what I love is, even though they're spinning their own yarn, they incidentally give actual historical events and facts, and even though they have different explanations as to how things happen, or the only possible way that this could be true is if there was outside intervention. There's still there are those little kernels of truth and areas that you've never heard of, like Titicaca or whatever, and underwater places and vortexes and all that kind of stuff. So there's still something to be learned, even if you don't kind of buy into their mythology of things.
I think there's an incredible amount to be learned, and I actually use Ancient Aliens. I teach a research class. I'm a librarian in my day job, and I'm trying to teach critical thinking, so I will show Ancient Aliens, and then we will break their arguments down to the minute level and say, okay, well, this is where they're wrong. This is where they're deliberately misleading you. This is where they're lying to you. This is where they're amateurs and they don't have the basic background in this field that anyone else would know, and so on and so forth. If you don't approach it with a level of skepticism, then you will start believing that aliens built everything. It's amazing they were so busy.
To think that one of their life goals would be to somehow affect the human genome.
by
But
piling stones up and not coming back.
yeah, but it's still interesting. When they have, because a lot of it's pseudoscience, but they actually do have scientists in there to kind of hopefully bolster the mythology that they're weaving.
Yep.
But I also I find I studied world religions. My minor was ancient Greek and Roman religion, which was really exciting to read your book because we have Alexander the Great and in amongst other things.
Yes.
And so I find this shit fascinating. So it's even more interesting to me. Like the other thing I like to watch on the History Channel is whenever they have stuff on the Bible or the devil
Sure.
or angels, because it's also got its bullshit factor. But there's a lot of history stuff that you learn when people are trying to tie history to religion.
Absolutely. And the more history they can get out, the better. And the fact that people are allowed to mythologize for themselves and question and have alternate views on things is fantastic. I think that's all to the good. Some of the things that disturb me about the ancient aliens theory is that it's just an outgrowth of 19th century racism. You have to come up with a reason why the people who live there, the actual native people, generally non-white, could not possibly have built what they built. Either
Yes.
it was a secret Aryan race who came down from Hyperborea, or it was Atlanteans. And when those things were disproven, suddenly it's aliens. I'm like, isn't it simpler just to say, oh, look, the Egyptians built it? Ugh, sorry.
Yeah, there's that. But the other thing that I find really hilarious, because there are a lot of shows on History Channel about the apocalypse.
Yes.
So it's like, how are you going to have it? They were ancient aliens, or these Mayans were fucking brilliant, and they saw all this stuff. Or Nostradamus, he really had shit down in his quatrains, and so like it's the same people who they like to gloss over manifest destiny and all the evil things that we've done to native peoples, and then hijack their faith, mythology, and history in order to bolster it's going to happen in 2012.
And all they have to do is have a fundamental misunderstanding of the circular nature of Mayan time, and bang, it's 2012. Like, oh, really, really, really? Ugh. If you're going to steal someone's cosmology, at least understand it far enough to be able to discuss it. Don't slather it onto a linear view of a Judeo-Christian history and expect time to end. It doesn't end. It just builds itself. Cataclysm comes, and then the second world, and then the third world, and so on. I'm sorry, I'm rambling.
No, it's fine. I ramble all the time. That's just the way I roll. One of my favorite memes, which is, the name for like the little jokes and stuff that you see on Facebook, little sniglets and whatnot.
Yes.
And it was two Mayans with each other. And they're like, let's mess with people and stop right here.
Perfect. Absolutely. Oh, I'm tired. I'll carve the rest of it tomorrow.
It's like, what this mess with 20th century people's minds?
They'll think time is ending.
One of the things that I think is so funny, and not funny, because there are people who jack up their credit cards and sell everything, and because the end of the world is coming and the rapture, and they're going to be taken up into heaven, and anybody who doesn't believe is going to stay in hell or whatnot, and then it doesn't happen, and we're like, oh, my mathematics were a little off. It really is.
A year from now, and maybe in October.
Yes. Oh, the reason why we got this wrong is because we were looking at the Jewish calendar and not this calendar, and that's the reason why we got the date off.
Well, sure, if we're looking at a lunar calendar as opposed to a standard Judeo-Claudian calendar, which is, variable depending on the length of the year. All right, I'm done.
No, I'm with you. I totally elicited that particular comment. I led you along that intellectual primrose path.
You did, but all you have to do is hit the right button, and I'll start babbling for hours about it.
But I find this shit fascinating. I don't know if my listeners do, but screw it. I think it's fascinating. Fascinating. Yeah, these, and I love fiction that, really makes you think. And there are all these little mythologies, like, I was thinking about that first, that drag show in Drag Queens, where, the Elvis song is coming on, and Are You Lonesome Tonight? And, it was, to me, what, I think what you executed very well was there was a reality, on that stage, and there was magic and connection between, the sullen yet handsome drag king and the regal, Egyptia, being there and resisting until she melts. I love that stuff.
I do too.
I love
Absolutely. Well done theater is ritual. It is magic. It does hand to and take from the audience a flow of energy that creates something that will never exist again. And that's the beauty of live theater, that you are experiencing something that will not be the same for anyone else at any other time. It's profound.
And there, since my life in my early 20s, I was always clubbing because I loved to dance.
Sure.
And so I've seen so much drag, and at first, oddly enough, the first time I had seen it, I was appalled in my feminist, post Mount Holyoke, I was like, is this what they think women are? And why, lesbians don't have a lot of money in the first place. Why are they tipping these drag queens? And I was just like in a tizzy. And then I grew up a little bit. I learned a lot of great things. I love Mount Holyoke. There are wonderful things about that place. But, I was a little too, my britches were too tight. And then there are just like some things that are so beautiful, like Karen Covergirl, like when she was in the moment, she, if she was testifying, she like rip off her earrings, take off her wig and throw it on the floor and just like lip sync the fuck out of that song.
Absolutely.
And I was like, I would get goosebumps.
Well, think about what's on Broadway now. Think about Hedwig and the remount with Neil Patrick Harris. The end of Hedwig takes off the wig, reveals a combination, a Gnostic transformation of the soul from Tommy Gnosis into Hedwig and into a whole being. And it's absolutely stunning, and it leaves the audience limp every time they see it. And it has that transformation and queer magic and understanding of drag and understanding of identity, pulls the audience in and then reveals more than they think they can handle, and then lets them go out into the world with it. It's amazing.
It's like that movie with Julie Andrews, Victor Victoria.
Yes.
That moment, when, she's just so glorious, and she's, singing Jazz Hot. And then takes that headdress off, and the men who are lusting after who they believe to be, somebody who's in drag, and they're appalled. And then the blonde who is upset that her boyfriend was paying too much attention, she's like, yay! It's just like, there were actually a couple of films that were exploring that around the same time, like Yentl.
Yep.
So, it's out there, and there are those little gems that I think one of the most liberating things is to see yourself somewhere. Yes. And to say I identify with that. And I think that's why I was so much into lesbian fiction, because it was just amazing to have us be the main characters and the drivers of the plot, and and it's La La Land, because in real worlds, like, you have all sorts of you have straight folks and everything, but it's not like this lesbian utopia. But at the same time, it's like a candy I couldn't have refused eating, because it just felt so good to be seen.
So good to be seen, and there's enough of variety of books for everybody. And one of the things that I actually love seeing about publishing in the last 15 years is the opening up of places where you can go to get exactly what you want. Mm-hmm. And a chance to explore the world from multiple viewpoints. And frankly, it is like candy, because I like the fact that we don't have to die at the end of the book anymore. Mm-hmm. We don't have to go crazy or go back to men or die. We can actually read a book and feel fairly certain by the end of it we will still be gay and still be happy.
Oh, yeah.
It's wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. and I think I can't remember who. This is terrible that I'm forgetting who the author is, but she wrote Pulp Fiction, and not Pulp Fiction the book, but Pulp
Right.
Fiction as in the genre.
Okay,
And
Bebo Brinker, those books.
um, I can't remember what it was, but she said her publisher allowed her to write the story as long as the story had an unhappy ending.
That would be, I think, The Well of Loneliness, Radcliffe Hall.
A little bit later.
Okay.
I'm so sorry. This is, one of those times where my brain is shot, and I don't think it's Anne Bannon, but it's there's something in the 50s or 60s that, it's somewhere in there, and like, Liz, you can't remember you can't remember anything you shot. But
It happens.
I know, it's just like your memory shot. But, right now they're one of the little glass ceilings are, on Amazon, where, you can have, when you're trying to choose how you're going to be referenced, it's like they have lesbian fiction as this huge umbrella that brings in, everything. It's kind of, in some ways, just like BDSM is everything and nothing. It says everything and nothing. Just having, this umbrella of lesbian fiction. I'm like, that's, honestly, there's mysteries, there's fantasy, there's true romance, historicals, all that kind of stuff, and to be kind of blanketed with that one term is difficult.
Well, thankfully, it's an umbrella now rather than just a small niche. Yeah, you can get everything. You can get thrillers and detective fiction and speculative fiction and urban paranormal romance and all kinds of things. All of it within the same field. I love that. I love the variety.
Oh yeah, it's amazing. It's just like an explosion. Um, and in some ways, at first, like I remember in the late '90s how we all saw Barnes and Noble and all these, these stores that were deeply discounting books, and regular indie stores just can't compete. They can't make a profit that way. They can't survive. And like Blockbuster ruining all the little, mom and pop shops. And then now the internet has taken a lot of these stores that had once been the killer of all these little indie shops, and now they're losing their gig. And
Yeah.
yeah, and with self-publishing, which is what I do, it just opens the net even wider to those who, they want to get their stuff out there. Some of it's good, some of it's bad, some of it's like anything, but, there's a wealth of choices rather than being shackled to one publisher, or just not having an option to get your stuff out there because you were not one of the anointed ones and contracted as an author.
Absolutely. And if you want to be able to go and find your Bigfoot porn, you can.
That was really something weighing on my heart. I had so much, in my early 20s, but without the Bigfoot porn, I really felt my life was lacking. And now that it's out there, I feel so much better.
Absolutely. And if you want to expand out into raptors of some sort, you can do that.
Velociraptors. Are you into fossil porn? Oh my God, I've been in the closet about it all these years, and, I would be dating paleontologists just to get close to it. And so much shame.
They come home and you're caressing their rock hammer, you don't know what to say.
Of course, I'm thinking of Miley Cyrus, the Hammer Licker.
All right. Anytime we can go from Ancient Aliens to Miley Cyrus, we are doing well.
See, everybody, this is so highbrow. Like we're so culturally intelligent.
But we still lick a good rock hammer.
Oh my God. Because I'm tangential, I'm going to change to something else. Sure. And this is back to spirituality and ways of knowing people, sure, and experiencing people. And in Burning Dreams, when Paul shows up, Rosalind sees the darkness around him, and as an aura,
Yes.
and um, having having that kind of vision, whether you're a medium or you have clairvoyance or whatnot, and your ability to kind of know somebody and see them, you can also help them.
Yes.
And that's what happened, in Burning Dreams. Like somebody who you just want to, I don't want to see my ex-husband, it's going to ruin my current relationship, and how dare you drink from Taryn's cup.
Yep.
But at the same time, to me, in your books, the way that you present it, it's very grounded, and very much the feet on the earth, so to speak, in this tangled web of experience and paganism.
One of the things that I wanted to do is reflect what I actually see in small pagan communities in small areas. There are people who are living a day-to-day experience of that particular spirituality, and they go to the market and they drive to work, and then they might see someone that has an aura around them, and then they talk to their friends about it later. Maybe they approach them, maybe they help them, maybe they don't. But it's another one of the experiences. It's a day-to-day thing that happens, and I wanted to bring that in because that's actually been my experience, whether or not I can prove any of it. And the delightful thing about religion is that you don't have to prove it. You get to feel it, you get to believe it, you get to use it as a metaphor for your soul.
Mm-hmm.
My experience has been that people are really quite grounded, whatever gifts they happen to have, and it becomes just another part of what's going on. If you're having dinner with someone and they look up and over your shoulder look slightly strange, you're like, all right, who's there? You just ask them who walked through the kitchen or what's going on. Why is the cat acting squirrely? And then you go back to what you're doing.
Yes. Yeah, in the old house that we lived in Hoboken, that was over 100 years old, sometimes our husky would look up in the doorway, up the stairs, and we're like, she was obviously seeing something. It wasn't early onset dog dementia.
No, animals are very sensitive.
Yeah, the book that I'm publishing in July has a lot of this spirituality in it, um, and the main character Charlie goes from life where she has an ordinary life, nothing paranormal going on. She has friends who, one friend, Valkyrie, owns Divine, which is a new agey kind of shop, and she reads cards and does regressions and past life regressions and all these other kind of things. So she believes in that for them, but she doesn't believe in it for her. And then all these things are happening, like she hears a child singing or praying, and she's like, where's that coming from? And she looks around, and there's nothing but leaves scraping the cement. She's alone.
Yep, sounds like it's right up my alley.
I think you just might like it. Hopefully.
I think I would love it.
Yeah, and what was fun about the process for me, first of all, it was a mystery how things were going to turn out. Like I had written it about 6 years ago, and the story that it is right now is not the story that it was then. But what was exciting for me, I was like, oh, well, what if this happened? And then a friend of mine had this really great dream. Like she's been going through a lot of stress, and then she had this dream about this enormous tree, like so enormous, like there, you can tell how big the trunk was, and she climbed into it, and some of the branches were hanging over the abyss, but the abyss was not frightening to her. It wasn't a bad thing. It was actually kind of fun to be above it, and she felt safe and cool. I was like, isn't that awesome that you can be like dangling over an abyss that could be absolutely terrifying, but actually feel safe and at home? And I was like, about 2 weeks later, I had written short stories about it because I thought it was fantastic, and I was like, oh, this is the perfect way for me to segue and have this little nugget of fact come out. And I was like, cool.
Absolutely. Well, the second book, Burning Dreams, when Taryn describes the dream that she has of being put up on the cross of the burnt wood with a splash of paint on it, and then being burned alive by her father. That is a dream that I actually had as a recurring dream as a young adult. And that's where the title of the book comes from. It was originally called Burning Dream. It didn't have the S on the end.
Mm-hmm.
But that was a little too grim for anyone to get involved with. But it's a fantastic way to take pieces of things. And you're right, or you do this, you understand it. You take things that are a perfect image or a perfect metaphor and you work it in. And dreams are fantastic for that.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And what was funny is that as I had a pendant that originally was going to be a Trinity knot, the Celtic Trinity knot, because I like, past, present, future, made in, chrome kind of stuff. And I was like, yeah, I like this. And then the tree came up and I was like, hold on a second. And I looked up online and I found the Tree of Life. And I was like, this ties in so much better into my book than the Trinity did. And so, and then it blossomed from there, and I'd be writing and I was like, oh, let me look this up. And then, I found, rituals and spells that can be cast, and it all tied into that dream that my friend had. She had a dream about that tree over the abyss, and it changed my book completely.
And it became the Tree of Life. It's perfect.
Yeah, I was like, this is rad. I like this a lot. And then I was able to, the story took shape, just from these little happenstances, like my friend having this dream. And, I contacted this other author who has this amazing series. Linda K. Silva writes this Echo series that has magic in it and whatnot. And I was like, so what kind of sources do you use? She's like, I don't use any one source, but why don't you just try plugging those into Google? And then I came up with the sources that eventually turned into shaping my story. So it's a very fun, dynamic process to be writing, especially when you're weaving in magic and mythology and meaning into a book.
Absolutely. It's fantastic because you are going on the journey and you really don't know where it's going to take you until you're done.
Exactly. And I was like, I didn't know what was going to happen next. And then, my friend who's editing it, she's like, you have me wondering. I was like, what's going to happen next? And I was like, yay. Because, it was such a dynamic process for me. And one of the things that I found valuable about it is that it was not predictable.
Yeah.
It wasn't, a trope or, something that people can kind of see coming a mile away. A lot of this stuff, there's just no way you could have seen it coming, because I didn't. I didn't see it coming, and then it just happened.
Isn't it one of the most fantastic experiences about writing?
Oh, it's so cool.
We don't know where it's going to go. It changes. It's a living thing. It changes under your hands. It's fantastic.
I know. Like I'm a planner / pantser. Planner because I'm tangential and I need to keep myself anchored. So sure. I have that going on. But there's also like the dynamic stuff. I have one question about Burning Dreams.
Sure.
The mural that was being painted and that Paul made that comment about the mural. How did that come about?
The mural?
Yeah, the mural.
That was another dream. I love the story of Persephone and Demeter, the Kore, the origin of spring, mm-hmm. being rescued from Hades, and so on and so forth. But because it is one of the nature myths, and Demeter being that goddess of growing things rather mm-hmm. than the goddess of the earth herself. That would be her mother, Rhea. Mm-hmm. Grandmother, would be Rhea. I had a dream where Demeter crossed a border and met up with the Green Man. It would be Cernunnos. It would be one of the British Isles nature figures, the leader of the Wild Hunt. And frankly, I think the two of them would have a lot to talk about. They have a very great streak of wildness and vengeance and anger, if crossed, and a great sorrow. And I liked that. And it just worked its way into that mural. And for me, it was representing people. And Joe, the character in Burning Dreams, the husband-to-be, was just not represented by the Demeter myth. It was mother, daughter, it was rescue, but it didn't have anything to do with that wild but stable and powerful male figure that Joe really was. And it was important to me that recognition of masculinity came from Paul, because he had been closely bonded with Joe throughout his time in that household. And that's really where he started to be able to feel comfortable about himself and experience all the weirdness around him without feeling weird himself.
Mm-hmm.
So I liked he was able to give a gift to Joe, and that gift was a recognition and then a symbolism.
And, it was an interesting, well, I'm not sure I would call it like a bonding point, but it showed Taran that, he was really thinking and experiencing, the relationship, and that he had something to offer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a deliberate setup to put the two of them together to have to work on a gift for Joe and Rhea. And they were pushed into it by the other characters, who were hoping that when we put two people together that have to create something, whether it's just physical work or work leading to a creative end, you begin to bond with the person you're working with. And it worked. It gives you a sense of someone else's humanity, and it crossed some borders, and they started liking one another a bit more.
Yeah, like when I was graduating from college, there was a little talk about diversity on campus, and there are a lot of different interesting people who are there. I think it was one of the singers from Sweet Honey in the Rock, and the ombudsperson for the college, and a bunch of other things, and the dean of faculty and whatnot, and they were working on aspects of diversity. And one of the things that I brought up is, unless you get people to interact, not much is going to change. You can talk about things, or being politically correct, or how we can be respectful in an environment together. And my idea was to get people from different walks of life to be working on a Habitat for Humanity project, where
Perfect.
they would be creating this house. People who would never interact with each other would bond with each other and interact with each other in a way that they wouldn't, because I did a paper about self-segregation, because nobody tells anybody at the dining hall. The Christians have to sit with the Christians, the Indian women have to sit with the Indian women, the people in crew have to sit with crew members. But inevitably, there were, all this separation of folks. And what I used to do is I would flit around from like one table to another, because I thought everybody was fascinating and awesome. But it was, because I never felt like sitting in one place was the right thing to do.
Sure.
But nobody makes those kind of choices. So just like you said, like they were kind of urging them together to create. And sometimes being in an environment where you urge people together to create, you also give them an opportunity to bond and to actually see each other.
Absolutely. Absolutely. As much as we can think we know something, we can intellectualize it to death, but until you physically go through the experience and then emotionally go through the experience, you're not really going to learn it. We can talk about it, but if we have to work together toward an end, we'll get to know each other.
Exactly. My idea was like, get that jock standing next to that, awesome woman, from Africa with these gorgeous, I mean, God, there were a few, we had a lot of international students, and some of the women would wear these fantastic dresses that were so colorful, and these headdresses, their scarves around their head, and they were so majestic and incredible. And I was like, I wish I was a big woman just like you. They had such a sense of self, and I was just fumbling, and I was like, this is incredible. So if you get all these different wonderful personalities and put them to work together on a project, you can make some bridges, make some connections.
Absolutely.
So
Very clever.
On that kumbaya note,
if we were not, well, if we weren't essentially optimistic, we wouldn't do what we do. I mean, at the root, we believe people are basically good. We want them to talk to each other. I mean, it's part of being a writer.
Mm-hmm.
We want people to understand, to have a window into somebody else's world. We want people to think. We want people to feel.
Oh, and on that wonderful note, we covered so much ground. I'm sure people's heads are duly spinning, and they're gonna go into their DVR and listen to Ancient Aliens. And
Oh,
just kidding. So I loved having you on the show. It was totally awesome. Thanks for coming on.
it was a great pleasure. Thank you.